I want to introduce our keynote. I don't want to take any more of her time. So, named one of the most innovative people in higher education by Washington Monthly magazine, Dr. Bridget Burns is the founding CEO of the University Innovation Alliance, where she works with some of the most innovative universities and presidents in American higher education. Her work has been highlighted in outlets like New York Times, Fast Company, 60 Minutes, and she was featured in the documentary Unlikely. What a great name for higher education. Please welcome Dr. Bridget Burns.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
No
like elbow bump or
yeah, elbow, whatever you want to do.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And for those of you at home, I hope that you're wearing comfortable pants and shoes, because the rest of us are definitely experiencing what it's like to come back in and try and fit into those pre-COVID pants. 2 times I went on the road, I did split my pants, so this is what I'm calling insurance. So today I'm going to talk to you about innovation and specifically what we need to do in higher education to position for the future. And ultimately, I think that it doesn't matter where you sit on the org chart or the type of institution that you're at. I believe that you can actually make small changes that will make a significant difference for our students. But first, you heard a little bit about my background. And while those things were all very true, I didn't pay him enough to lie. There's actually something that probably the most appropriate thing about my background that matters is that I grew up in poverty in rural Montana. So this cold does not scare me at all, right? I grew up in a strange family that I didn't know we were poor because they were preppers, which is, for those who are not familiar, it's a kind of person who their idea of fun is preparing for the end of the world. So yeah, Y2K is like too soon to talk about in my family still. And I know that COVID's been hard for everyone, but as the daughter of preppers in a global pandemic, I can confirm there is no limit to the number of ways that someone can tell you, I told you so. So it's been really great. So like a lot of our families for low-income students and first-generation students, I didn't have any helpful conversation about college. In fact, the only time anyone talked about college in my family was when my dad would make jokes that if I really wanted to go to college, I would do what my brother did and win a state championship in wrestling. Super helpful. But like many first-generation students and low-income students, we get a lot of bad advice. And so I sifted through that bad advice and I found some kind of nuggets of truth to follow. And what I found was if I was really good at something, that I would get to go to college. So I focused exclusively on trying to be as good at something as possible, totally neglected my studies. And by the time I graduated high school, I was a state champion in debate and I had a 2.3 GPA. Barely eked out. And it turns out there's not as much interest in a mediocre student who can argue about it as there is for a Big Ten wrestler. So that was a fun surprise. So I stumbled to a community college and managed to try and figure out how to still go. And like a lot of our students, I had a perspective about higher education that I think we need to talk about, which is I thought that, I've been taught to respect my elders, and I thought that these institutions where people are called doctor and they have these fancy titles, and they are really a pillar in society, naturally I thought that they would know what they were doing and they would keep an eye out, and if I got off track, that they would get me on the right path. I also thought, whatever they tell me to do, I'm going to try and follow. So when they handed me a choose your own adventure map, that wasn't particularly helpful, but I still tried to move forward. And I just worked really hard to get all this financial aid information from my family, which you cannot imagine how difficult it is to get financial information to give to the government from a prepper. So here I am, this institution, they know that I'm poor, they know that I don't have a lot of resources, and when they send me a letter that says that I should take out $5,000 in student loans, even though that's the most money I've ever seen in my life, I naturally assume, like our students do, that of course that's the right move. I should just follow their lead and someone will take care of me. So I take interesting classes and I try and follow somewhat a program of study, but I amble just like many of our students do. And ultimately, it took me 7 years to get my bachelor's degree by the time I graduated. 7. And I had 50 credits that didn't count and $50,000 in student loans. And this is the best case scenario for many of our students, because I had run into something that is a very challenging reality, but is a truth in higher education. And that is that higher education was actually never designed around students. It just wasn't. In fact, when we first designed universities in this country, we designed it around the faculty, because that was the only intellectual capital we had. And so we designed originally our institutions around them. And do you know who's the most uncomfortable with that? The faculty. Because they have a front row seat to watch students walk out their door every day for a totally predictable reason that they've raised their hand about 5 times. Some people are resistant to this idea that it's not designed around students, but this is actually a truth across all sectors. And all I have to do to explain that to you is to point to one example that's true everywhere, and that is graduation. Supposedly something that we're into it, right? Like we really like that to happen. So why is it that when it's time to graduate, the institution doesn't know and the student has to tell us? And then when they do tell us, we let them fill out a bunch of forms and paperwork. And lastly, we ask them to pay a fee. That is not user-centered design. That is bad design. If you were trying to check out of your cart at Amazon, beyond paying for your goods, if all of a sudden they said, by the way, we'd also like you to fill out a bunch of paperwork based on to get information that we actually have access to if we just had our data systems connecting, and we're going to also have you pay just to be able to have the privilege. If that were the case, we would know they don't really want us to do that. Unfortunately, this is a reality throughout our institutions. And I know that might seem hard, but I promise you this is a good thing. Because if it is a design problem, which I would posit it is, then that means you design your way out of it. It also means it's not about motivation. It's not about intention. There is no one in an ivory tower somewhere twisting their mustache, setting booby traps for students. In fact, the only reason people work in higher education, from my experience, is that it changed their life and they would like to pay it forward. That's the reason why people work there. And so it's actually very frustrating for administration, for staff, for faculty, when we run into these design flaws, because it's just that we haven't given ourselves the time to work on our design. We haven't given ourselves the time to make sure that we had the capacity and support to make sure our data system's connected, or that we spent time listening to students and really understanding what they were going through, because the first step of design is empathy. So we know that it wasn't originally designed around students, and this is true across all of higher education because of this thing called isomorphism, which is basically that all universities, just like hospitals and other big bureaucratic organizations, we replicate each other's design because we think that's what a university looks like. Great, let's create one of these. And okay, Bursar, that's the name, even though none of you actually know what that is, except for those of you who it reports up to you, or if you're a Bursar, right? We all have the same offices. It doesn't matter if you're a community college, if you're a small private or a large university, you have an office for financial aid. You probably have an enrollment management office. You also have an admissions. It's all pretty much the same. So this is why this is a good thing, is that if it's a design problem, we can design our way out of it. And if we all do the same thing, then that means we all have the same problems. And it also means that the solutions that work in one place will likely work in another. You just have to adapt it. So I would say that everything else I talked to you about today it requires that we just build upon this. But if you look throughout higher education, all the challenges we're facing, especially the ones as we're thinking about the future, it all lays at the feet of higher education not being designed around students. The fact that the system was perfectly designed to get the results it does. And I would argue that the current design is insufficient for the task ahead. But the good news is, have you all seen how amazing you are in the last few years? Like, anyone who ever wants to talk trash about higher ed not being able to innovate clearly has not seen what happened. You did things that never should have been possible, and you did it in one day. You overcame every obstacle. I know we're all feeling exhausted, right? But You deserve the confidence that you've earned over the past few years. And I believe that because we were able to adapt, we have new courage, new muscle of strength that we're going to rely upon as we try and redesign our institutions to meet the needs of those that we're seeing ahead of us, the new normal. So I don't think anything feels normal about today. I understand that. But I want to walk you through what's happening in the data with our students and who our students are going to be. But I would say the headline is that the student has changed, and the students that we need to serve, we need to open up our eyes and consider possibilities of who else our students might be. Because this idea of this perfect 18 to 22-year-old from a family with resources and they're multi-generation, so they have good advice. Those students don't exist, or if they do, they're very rare. They are not how we should orient our institutions if we want a position for the future. The new normal students, you need to know a few things about them. They are highly sensitive to bad design. Highly sensitive in a way that never before. You all can pick up your phone and order food to show up without even having to talk to someone. That's exactly what you want. It's a little cold, but it still shows up, right? You can pick up your phone and have a car show up, and you don't have to talk to the person other than asking them how long they've worked for Uber because you want to seem relatable. And I mean, we are experiencing user-centered design in our lives in a way that we never have. So we have very high standards, and our students have high standards, whether we're talking about adult learners or the younger population. So just know that their sensitivity to bad design, and when they hit a hurdle, they're going to walk out the door a little bit faster. The second thing is they are digital. They really, at no point in the future will we be able to go back to a time when you aren't offering online learning. Students in the future will make decisions about the kinds of education they want and where they're going to go to school based on the institution that will help them learn best based on their learning style. They will know that, and it will be easy for them to understand what institutions do that well, and they will make those decisions accordingly. They're already starting to do this. The problem is they're not doing it for universities. Coursera and all these micro-credential spaces, they're choosing to pick a little bit from here and a little bit from there of what they want, and they are making decisions based on what works for them. Which is fine, because I actually believe that there is more than enough for everyone, that we actually need to upskill and reskill millions of people. There is incredible opportunity in this moment if higher education will just start thinking about different types of students. I also want you to understand that these students they're not looking to be in a box. We often look at our students as in the box of you're enrolled or you're not enrolled. That's it. We only care about the students who are enrolled. But there is this new middle ground that we actually need to make sure our process is really solid to support them. They also like bite-sized, they like micro-credentials. They want a certificate. They maybe just want to focus on one skill. They want to take one class. So if they have to walk through the enrolled door in order to get it, they're never going to walk through our doors. So we actually have to understand and reverse engineer so that our institutions actually meet the needs of society more broadly. I think it's also important to point out that students this day and age really expect that universities will center equity in a way that is meaningful and real. That it's not just that there's one person of color on the executive cabinet, that there is just a brochure that represents an image, but the reality is nothing like that. And the reason that they expect this is it's 2022. That's what they're just like, I mean, come on. I get that universities are proud of we're older than the church, but we're supposedly the hotbed of innovation, creativity, and change. So it's time for us to take equity seriously. They also believe the same thing about sustainability. So those things really matter to these students. I think the last piece that really matters is that they expect that what we offer them is going to be aligned with the workforce of the future, not 20 years ago, which is obvious. And who they are is going to change, but I would just say almost every student is going to have transfer credits. Because now it's normalized that most K-12 high schoolers, they're taking classes while they're in school, right? So if your transfer process is actually not that great, that means that you're actually making it very difficult for even the students that you theoretically wanted to support from the beginning and was centered in your design, not really. So understand those are the kinds of things in the new normal we need to focus on. The other is that we have to actually step up because there's incredible opportunity, as I mentioned. We need to add about 11 million more college graduates to keep up with the economic competitiveness of our country. And this is something that is, I think, a call to action for all of higher education. There is more than enough for everyone. 8 million people needed upskilling as a result of COVID. If we're opening our eyes to who our students are, there are just going to be so many more of them. The reason why we're all freaking out about enrollment is that we're focusing on this idea of the student who is kind of like doesn't really exist anymore. And so it's really about opening up our design. This slide helps you understand where we're in terms of misalignment of the outcomes of our sector and the needs. And really, it's just two issues. One, I know it's like super cool to talk trash about higher ed right now. Like, it's like TikTok, right? But it's actually, we actually are offering very innovative courses and degree programs for 20 years ago. So we have to actually have a real conversation with workforce and align with what we're offering. I'm not saying that the only thing we do is help create jobs, but I do think we should probably position a little bit for the future. The second trend that we need to focus on is that half of all the people who walk in our door fail. Half of all students drop out. So if you want to know what you can work on, this is the opportunity, is to actually work on our design to actually retain more students, and then we're going to actually position for the future in a way that we really need to. Another piece that matters is to understand about the future that for the first time in U.S. history, low-income students are the majority in public K-12. And so if there's a population that you want to make sure that you do a good job for, it's definitely going to be, if we're thinking of 18 to 22-year-olds, they're going to be low income, which we haven't historically done that great with, but there's still plenty of evidence that we can make change. So this slide, the bottom quartile, that red line, those are students from my background. Back in the 1970s, almost like 7 out of 100 got a bachelor's degree. And now it's about 10 out of 100. But if you look at that high up line, you'll see that 40% of high income earners or high income students, they got a bachelor's degree in the 70s. And now, after all this time, we've more than doubled that. I think change is possible. We just have to shrink that gap. But this is why it's a priority for us to make sure that our design centers the most vulnerable students. I know that you're nervous about enrollment, so I just want to let you know that this is not something that is specific to your institution. Enrollment is dropping everywhere except for basically like that green line is Harvard. And so what does that mean? You will not market your way out of this enrollment decline. It is not about market differentiation. Focus on service and experience for the user and expanding your idea of who students are, and you will be fine. So this is about how the sectors are being affected, various types of institutions by enrollment. But this is also how we're seeing it in terms of states. So if you're in a blue state, there's going to be more there's a college-going population growth. Everywhere else is declining. So it's really important to notice, I'm sorry that we're in this state, we are definitely on the decline. But that's okay, because again, this is typically, most of the stuff you're seeing that's freaking you out right now is again focused on 18 to 22-year-olds. This is not a temporary change in terms of the number of students we have, because the birth rate is declining. We're not replacing ourselves, which basically means if you start working on this today, of expanding your idea of who your students are, centering their needs, focusing on user design, and actually taking digital seriously, you are going to be positioned on the cutting edge, and your institution will thrive. It's the institutions who are thinking that this is just a wave, we'll just get through this. We'll be back to things soon. When can we turn off Zoom U? Those institutions will be in trouble. Right now, the way that we have designed higher education in this country is based on this very basic understanding that we go to college, or we go to community college, or you just finish high school, and then you spend the rest of your life working. And this is just not true anymore. We have to reimagine our relationship with work in that people are going to come and go from work. They're going to upskill. They're going to want to learn more and evolve. And I think one of the things, if we could banish in higher ed and beyond, I would banish the question of, is college for everyone? Because it's a problematic question, and it assumes that you can make that decision. You make it once in your life at 18 years old, and that's it. You're apparently not for college. It doesn't make sense, but it also, personally, I've seen how it's not true. You see, my father was one of those kids who didn't think college was for him. And so he joins the Marine Corps, he goes to Vietnam, comes back out, has to figure out how he's going to support his family. And so he goes to farrier school and becomes a horseshoer. Again, I told you my family was weird. This is not surprising to any of you. But my dad's a horseshoer, and eventually my brother and I come along. And when I was 2 years old, my dad went to work one day and a horse flipped over on him and paralyzed him from the waist down. And just like millions of other people, in an instant, he had to change his idea of who he was. He could no longer use his body to earn an income to support his family. He had to find a way to transition to the knowledge economy. So thankfully, he decides to cash in his GI Bill. He goes to Montana State University and gets a degree in computer science. Now, things are a little more complicated if you're in a wheelchair in terms of earning, but it's beyond just the classroom experience when we think about design, because what happened is he didn't just get an education. He also started to remember that he could be an athlete regardless. So he started playing wheelchair basketball and engaging in wheelchair racing. And he actually went, in the middle of his education, he won the world championships in wheelchair racing. And that's what higher education can do. It's not just about what happens inside the classroom. So when I talk about adult learners, I'm basically saying, please don't just think about inside the class. We actually have to reimagine the holistic experience, because the magic of education is something they deserve too. This is what the future needs to look like, where you move to and from education when you want to grow and evolve. This is how we have to shift our design. And if we do this, we will actually rise to the needs of society, and we will position ourselves for the economic competitiveness that we want to regain. Now, I'm not just an optimist about this and saying all these things that need to happen. I actually have seen that change is possible, rapid change is possible, and I believe that no matter where you sit, you can lead that change. Because for the past, since 2014, almost 8 years, I've worked with institutions throughout the country who didn't trust each other, didn't know each other. They just came together and decided that they wanted to try and work on a big goal together. They wanted to graduate more students, more low-income students, eliminate their equity gaps. And despite their differences and the fact they're physically far apart, they did manage to transform their institutions. And in this short 8-year period of time, we've increased our low-income graduates by 45% annually, our students of color graduating by 85% annually, and we've produced almost 100,000 more graduates. Now, I'm just saying that change is possible, but you have to understand some of the beliefs about that change that are very basic. I want to tell you it's a chat bot and it's an AI and you just you boobity bop and it's all perfect. It's actually very simple stuff that makes change. Of course, the first is designing your institution around students, but the other is you can take inspiration from other places. The most innovative places in the world, I don't think, are in higher education. Did I say that? Shh, not very loudly. There is a place for you to get inspiration outside of the academy, and I would just encourage you to look elsewhere. Whatever challenge you're facing, there are places who have dealt with that. Healthcare improvement communities. There are lots of places where companies have innovated. Like right now, we're trying to figure out what to do about not being able to recruit and retain employees. We think it's about paying more. It's actually, we have to redesign our conception of work, and we have to actually create meaningful pathways in those so that we have careers inside the academy. We have all these frontline staff that we can't hire for. Lots of other industries have dealt with this same problem, and it's about re-engineering and redesigning that work and making sure there's meaningful mentorship, right? So that's just one example. But the place that I got inspiration from was Weight Watchers. I know that we're probably all in Weight Watchers right now, right? Like with COVID. Weight Watchers is actually, I think, the most effective improvement community that you could participate in globally. Innovation's hard. You know what else is? Losing weight. Hard. So Weight Watchers is a very basic concept, which is you have to sign yourself up for Weight Watchers. And when you do, you come in, you weigh yourself on the same scale every week. If you do well, they praise you. But if you don't, they still say congrats for coming in again. And then the most important piece is that you walk into a back room and you find other people who are struggling with the same problem, where you can talk about the ideas that are getting in the way, the things that are hard, the fact that you feel like you're haunted by cookies at night. That's what you need if you want to try and drive rapid change. The University Innovation Alliance, I would argue, is just like a really big Weight Watchers group for universities to be good at something they've never been good at. Creating spaces where there's social safety to talk about failure, to talk about the things that are hard, that is the path forward. There are a variety of other challenges to innovation. You could talk about financial sustainability and our HR innovation issue, or maybe it's aging buildings, or any of the things that are coming up for all of you. And you can think of probably 10 right now. But I would argue that underneath every one of those is actually a much more basic issue. The real impediments to innovation are quite simple. First, this is what we all look like right now, right? This is what burnout and exhaustion, this is what's happening. He'll keep doing that, so I'll go to a neutral slide. We think that burnout is that people need to have a vacation. I mean, that's nice too, but really it's about disconnection with purpose and work. People feel unfulfilled and uninspired. They also want to see a future path forward. They want to feel like their contribution matters. So it's not necessarily just that people need a vacation. So if anyone here has applied for a vacation and your boss is in here, yes, I will double tap on the vacation. The second, so burnout is something that we are really focused on right now, and we're all feeling it. But this is just on the backs of a much bigger issue, which is the design of our work. This is how you look. I hope it's not too triggering for you. We have this belief in higher ed that if we just give you more work, your plate will expand. It doesn't work, right? You actually need time to work on new things. We need to staff and support new initiatives. And we need to not go to as many totally boring meetings that should be an email. We have 1 million committees that are ineffective. Committees are about communication, which means they could be an email. Teams are about action. That's what we believe that you should have, is creating a team with a goal, with clarity about how you're going to know when you get there, and focus on action. So just in general, the way we staff and structure things. I know that we have a lot of CFOs, so I would also add, we have a historic strategy that I think, I'm not against retirees, but I would just say historically what we do is, instead of hiring when we see new work come in, we bring someone back at 0.49 who's retired rather than actually staffing it. And there's nothing wrong with that, except it's happened for generations. And as a result, our org chart has not responded to the new work that has emerged. We have a very old org chart, and we haven't actually created space for us to treat new ideas well and to actually incubate them and support them. So just in general, just some ideas. I'm not saying you can't do that anymore. One of the things that happens when people think you're into innovation is I get invited to college campuses. And when I come, they're always kind of trying to impress me and show me the innovation thing. And whenever I go to a new campus, it often feels like that guy in the gym. Yeah. I mean, he's just like so much enthusiasm and energy. Like, he's going to get somewhere. I just don't know where, you know? So we don't actually set plans in place we don't make decisions about why we're doing, I'll go back, he'll keep doing that. We don't give ourselves a chance to actually set up a plan and a strategy to ensure that we are successful. We don't create a team when we have a new project. Oftentimes I ask, like, why that now, and what's the next thing you're going to do? And we don't have time for that. We're firefighting, right? And so what we do is we're just like, President says we have this problem. We're going to, okay, well, whoever's lane that's in, it's your job to solve it, even though that's not your area of expertise, solving that problem. And because universities are a little bit insular, you don't know who to talk to, so you come up with your own solution, or they come home and they say, we're doing chatbots, or it's analytics. Okay, we're doing that. Why? How will we know if it's successful and it solves our problem? What are we doing next after this? How frequently are we going to test and make sure that this is the right approach? So just in general, be ye not homeboy, be a little bit more intentional. And this is what it's like when you do ask for help from your peers in higher education, and you ask what problems, does anyone else have this problem? We've set up our culture to focus on posturing and preening, and we only share the headlines, and here's how my institution's different. When at the end of the day, what we actually want to know is like, hey, do you struggle with the same problems I do? Like, I can't get through my calendar. You know what? No, the biggest impediment to innovation? It is your phone, it's your calendar, and your inbox. When do you have time to actually work on innovation? Good ideas don't interrupt bad meetings, which is hard because that's all we go to sometimes. So I would say that this is all an opportunity because there's a solution to each one of these. But first, I want to give us a moment to answer a question. So for those of you here, you can do the QR code, you take the picture and answer this. So what do you think is for you personally? All right, my burnout people, you're in the lead. Oh, staffing short, yep, okay, good. So for those of you at home, you can contribute in real time and let us know what you think is creating the problem. Yep, staffing shortages. This is all very relatable. This is fun. Man, I think, burnout is staffing shortages. Whew, that's where we're at, right? Okay. I think, so this is the first. And by the way, these are going to remain up so folks can actually be able to reflect back on them. But I feel like we have a good sense. Yep, staffing shortages, which again, I would argue we need to innovate HR. And I don't believe that HR has the functional capacity and strategy and support. They're not innovators. So we're expecting HR to adapt to this. And what they're going to do is say, pay more money or advertise in different places. And that's actually not the issue because it's a different kind of work that inspires people who have participated in the Great Resignation. And people over COVID, when we lived at our office, we discovered that maybe it wasn't the end all be all. And in fact, they weren't willing to put up with as much as they used to. So that's about, again, purpose and inspiration and community, reminding people why they do this work. So the next one was, what do you think would be helpful to support your ability to solve problems and lead innovation? If you had just, time. Time's a winner. Time alone. Do you need more consultants? Do you need more staffing capacity? I think that's going to probably get there. So this is where you can identify the things that you need to do and help us get a sense of what you have in common. I would just say that it's very clear to me there's not outliers, that we're all kind of wrestling with a different mix of this each day. And I believe this shows on your phone the results. Is that true? So you're going to be able to watch this? Okay, great. So I'll move on to the actual solutions that will hopefully help with some of these things. Because again, I want to tell you it's like super high tech and you're going to need James Cameron and there's going to be Avatar and we're going to wear green suits and it's going to be super, super fancy. It's not. It's actually pretty simple. The first is we have to change the way we structure and support innovation. We have this idea that if I create an office that's like the center for innovation over here on the corner of campus, that's where innovation is. Go there for good ideas. Or we have a vice president for innovation who's going to shove innovation down into the institution. I have not seen either of those necessarily work. Centers for innovation are nice because they create spaces for people to engage in ideation. I'm not saying get rid of them, but I think that there's a fundamental problem here we need to call out. It essentially implies that your entire staff, that all of your people who already have pledged their lives to higher education, that they're not innovative. That it's got to be someone else's job. And what my experience has shown is that actually everyone who works in higher ed is capable of innovation, creativity, and change. What you need is to create space for that and actually cultivate it. The thing that we have found tactically across all of my campuses is that you find the overburdened kind of mid to senior level person, so VP of undergraduate, but in your division, whoever's like, maybe it's just CFOs, right? You find the person who gets the most work. Because people being effective, that's how you get more work, right? That's the reward. You did a good job. Here's more work. And so what you do is actually, you don't hire more of those people. You actually hire a early to mid-career professional to come in right below them to be almost like a chief of staff or a project manager. That is actually the most effective hiring you can do. For us, it's $50,000 to $70,000 a year. You want to make sure that you actually professionally develop them. We train them as facilitators and project managers. We call them UIA fellows. And they really make a huge difference because they aren't in a lane. They work across lanes. And we see them as the future talent pipeline in higher ed that we've always needed. They are often for first generation low income and students of color. And they are already leading national initiatives for the Gates Foundation and a variety of other organizations because this has been what's needed. And if you're thinking about that difficulty to hire on the front end, I promise you, this is actually going to be a right solution for you. the most innovative thing that you can use to change the future of your institution is a Post-it note. So there's something called process mapping. How many of you know what that is? Okay, a couple folks, right. So I didn't know about this a long time ago, but this is something that's very common in most industries where they actually use this if you want to improve your institution. So the first step of design is empathy. And so you go out and you interview a bunch of students and just kind of ask them, like, tell me about your experience. If you had a magic wand and could fix something or change something to have made it better, what would you do? What should the institution do differently? You just gather some insights and you figure out a place that they clearly have some booby traps. Then what you do is you invite folks into a room who all work near or around that booby trap. Right? So depending on the point in time in the student trajectory. And you engage in this thing called process mapping, which is just a very simple thing where you literally put a Post-it note up on the wall for every step, for every message that gets sent, for every expectation that we think a student knows what to do. For me, I didn't meet with advisors because no one told me when to or how to know when to. I also didn't go to office hours because that sounded like when people were doing office work. A lot of coded language, so you want to process map that. So what you do is you're in the same room together and you start seeing the system how it really is, not how you fantasize it to be. And by the way, there are people who in your institution are certified in process mapping. They do this, whether it's in the business school, you have folks in design. It's a very accessible training. We've created a free online training, Orion, like lots of people do this. And you can just you can go online to learn how to do it. But just Post-it notes. At the end of the day, though, what happens is you take a step back and everyone in that room just saw what happened. You don't have to try and get buy-in because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And there are going to be some obvious places where there's low-hanging fruit. And what you want to do is you want to strike on those. Things like, hey, the data for that one thing, it doesn't come over to my office. Oh, great. What's your email address? I'm going to send that to you. You can fix some things right then. Then what I recommend is you have the president or provost or whoever's the division lead. You're not in that room, but you come in at the end of the day and you ask, what did we learn? That's the prompt. What did we learn? Not, hey, how are we screwing things up? You want to create social safety where you actually like engaging and talking about things that you have surface learning. So that's process mapping, very basic. We've done this with financial aid holds, the transfer process, admissions, graduation, how different offices interact with each other, you name it. If you just do this time over time over time, and you actually set it up consistently, you embolden your teams, and you make it a good experience, like we always play some sweet jams, there's always music lightly playing, maybe a couple snacks, it's a couple hours, then what you do is you set up your institution to be a learning institution, or maybe it's your division or your department. But now it's kind of cool. If we actually go together every few months, we find a new area of problem, we surface low-hanging fruit, we take action on it, and then we are slowly re-engineering our institution. It's that simple. You don't have to hire a bunch of people to come in and help you. So I want to first pause now before this next slide, in that you all have been sitting for quite a bit. If you're physically able, and especially you at home, grab the dog, give him a pet, stand up if you're physically able, and move around a little bit. You can play some jams if you want. And at home, you can definitely, go get some of that much better coffee than is available to us in public spaces. So I'm having you do this because when you've been sitting, so there's this thing called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Now, your brain produces a protein that's BDNF, and what it does is, as you're producing it, it's what helps you retain new ideas. And after you've sat for 20 minutes, you produce less. How long are our lectures? There's a lot of wisdom in the academy that we could use to actually redesign and reorient how we do things. This is now your excuse to use BDNF every time that you're in a really boring meeting, and you can make it seem like it's about science. So you can sit whenever you like. You can feel free to stand, however, but I just want to point out that there's definitely some stuff that we could use here together. So I shared a little bit about process mapping, but let me just actually make it real for you. This is Michigan State. What they did is they decided they were going to map the first 3 months from when a student gets admitted to the day they show up on campus. And when they did that, they found that they, put all these Post-it notes up on the wall. People were in the same room together for the first time. And when it looked over at communication, there were 450 Post-it notes, which means that at Michigan State, they sent 450 emails to every incoming student in that 3-month window of time. And if you don't know what your number is, it's 500. And that is overwhelm. That says to students, don't check your email because we're not going to help you. You're going to figure this out. There was also 50 types of holds they identified that this institution didn't know about that would stop a student from registering. So just that would transform the experience for incoming students, especially first generation. And so what you do then is you share it with the president, and then a few months later, you do it again. And you create this cadence that we are a learning organization and that we believe that we can actually fix any of these challenges. That's how you actually address the issues of the new normal. You center and start having conversations with adult learners. You start thinking about student parents. You start thinking about the transfer process. And you just make sure that what you think is happening is really as good as it is. So I also think there's some things that you can take home with you. The first question I want you to take home for a meeting with your team is, how do you treat new ideas? The most innovative institutions have an actual process by which you treat new ideas. Think about the last time a new idea or a good idea came in. Where'd it come from? Is it when so-and-so went to that conference? Or that team had an offsite? Or is it, somebody took a vacation and came back with good ideas from the outside? If you don't think about where you get new ideas, you won't engineer more of them. It's a worthy undertaking for you to actually engage in open conversation about, let's talk about the last 3 new things that actually worked out that we talk about and we're proud of. Where did that actually come from? How did we treat it? Because too often what happens is a new idea comes in and we think it's time to debate it. And I just want to encourage you to use a yes and framework in meetings, which I know for those of you who did improv and forced your family members to go watch you do improv, I know, right? This is bringing it back. But yes and is one of our core beliefs in the UIA. So if you brought out a new idea, I will say yes and I will add to it, right? It's not no but. We want to create a socially safe space where new ideas are actually going to be welcome and celebrated and supported. So, do you have any ways of supporting new ideas? I think that's a spot for you to respond. This is open-ended, so you might have might have more answers. So I will move on to the next one to give you, which you can respond to, which is, does your campus have an innovation or new idea support strategy that is not just a center for innovation? Oh, I should have put that in there. Not sure. Then that's the answer. That's what you need to know. Because you are probably often asked to solve problems, and if you don't know whether or not there's a strategy, there isn't one, which means that you get to create it. And there are very easy resources out there in terms of looking at, again, improv is a good start, but there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of innovation and support that we put online, but other organizations help as well. So, the next one I want to share with you that is something to put in your pocket to help you no matter what is the idea of a strategy for failure. The most innovative places have an autopsy process. You just have to. Failure is the best teacher. Think about, every campus has a multi-million-dollar failure on our campus we just don't talk about because we're a little embarrassed that we launched that one thing or we started down that path. But you could possibly force other people to repeat that mistake, and students are the ones who write those checks. So what we actually have to do is create a socially safe place for us to talk about, to surface insights, and to learn from failure. It's really the most important thing that you could possibly do. So when we have something that doesn't go right, the prompt is not, oh my God, how did we screw that up? It's, first, you have to lead with vulnerability. And as a leader of your unit, if you want more of this, you start by saying, this is something I thought was going to happen, and here's where I think here's what I learned from it that I would do differently. Or, boy, I really messed up on this one thing, and now I've learned that next time I'm going to do differently. You have to model it so that it's okay for people. and not be punitive. But the most critical thing is if you don't have a strategy for failure, then you are going to continue to do the thing that we always do. So I see universities do this all the time, which is we have a new solution for students, and we never talk to students about it. We don't pressure test it at all. We don't give ourselves a baby opportunity to try it in micro form. We just do it. And as a result, we keep running into walls. But all we need is to set ourselves up of what was our process there? When did we talk to students? What kinds of questions could we have surfaced and put into the way we think about change that would help us? So you can answer this first question of how your institution treats failure. Think about the last time that there was a failure. Did you shove it under the carpet? And then you can ask, does your university have an autopsy process? Do you have a protocol in which you consistently, I don't know, is very good answer because it means no. But so you're going to see, yes, we don't know. That's no. So 60 plus 34, we're at a majority of no. So this is a great opportunity for you to surface in your next meeting that you need a protocol by which you're going to actually learn from your experiences and integrate it in your culture. Are you confident that your campus has an effective and consistent method for learning from failure? I feel like no is going to solve that. Great. Lastly, it's about your habits. So I talked to you about a possible example with process mapping, where you bring folks together, get them super hyped up and inspired. We've done this before. I'll come in and do a keynote, get people excited about the opportunity, and then they form a team, and a month later they do a process map of one part of the student journey. Then, they report out to the president. That feels very affirming. And 3 months later, they're going to do it again. They're going to have another process map. Different group each time, but it starts to create this cadence where we are slowly learning and re-engineering. That's how you recenter students in the design, and that's actually how you can adapt for the new normal. But we really need to think about our habits because we have habits in higher ed. Where graduation, maybe it's when you're about to get audited, maybe it's when you have convocation coming, or because we're getting our accreditation going. There's certain things that we do that are set up as habits. I recently became a meditator. Any of you try to wrestle with meditation? Whew. I mean, I tried for the longest time, and I failed consistently because I kept focusing on being like, I want to be a meditator. When really my goal was I wanted to be someone who had the benefits of meditation in my life. And finally, when I stopped obsessing about the goal and I focused on being a kind of person who had the habit of meditation, it changed everything. So now every morning there's a specific trigger that I then sit and I take a couple breaths. Sometimes it's a minute, sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes it's 10 minutes. It's never perfect. I'm not winning any Olympic medals for meditation, right? But I do it consistently, and therefore I am a meditator, right? So think about what kinds of habits would an institution who achieves the goals that you have, what kind of habits would they have? How frequently would they check in on their data and make sure they were making progress? How frequently would they talk about this subject? Go back. Not sure? Great. Not sure is the right answer always. What habits do you think, now you can focus on your campus, but I want you to think about your division. What kinds of habits do you think, think about the goal you're responsible for. If it's financial sustainability, if it's navigating a really risky chapter ahead, then what kind of practices would you have? Probably open-ended meetings where you could actually engage in brainstorm fairly consistently. You'd have time on your calendar carved out for ideation. You would also make sure that the right folks were having the right conversations. You would make sure that you looked at the data you were being measured against on a fairly regular basis. Just think about the kinds of habits that would set you up for success. Don't be so obsessed with just focusing on the project of today. The last thing I want to share with you is that this is a perfect opportunity for you, whether you are at home or you are here. Higher education, because of isomorphism, we all have the same problems, right? Which means that we could actually team up on most of these problems, forming habits, starting to actually work on process mapping our institution, reimagining who our students are, coming up with a different strategy for supporting transfer students. These are all things that you shouldn't be doing alone. But the problem is, too often, when I think about universities, it can feel like you're looking at a mountain range of beautiful individuals, right? How tall each institution is, how special and different they are. We're so focused on that. Our sector pits us against each other in like a Hunger Games, and then we're surprised that we throw elbows. I would encourage you that if you want to move forward, moving forward together is the right answer. And the way to move forward is to not talk about your peaks, but focus on your shared valleys. You all have the same problems. Staffing shortages, trying to figure out how to reimagine the workforce, try and figure out how you're going to support and create professional development that actually keeps millennials engaged in the workforce, try and figure out what you're going to do for student parents when you know that we actually are having a childcare challenge. Like, these are not things you solve alone. These are things that you could actually pull together, colleagues in similar environments, to create a community of practice to support you. And I think this is worthy work. Because the future of our country, the economic competitiveness of our country, the social mobility of our country, the preservation of our democracy, higher education is the solution to all those things. We are absolutely going to be able to bring society forward. And I believe that it's only if we work together. So I told you a little bit about my background. The one thing I would add is that I wouldn't change anything of it. Like, I wouldn't change a single, all 50 extra credits, all $50,000, because every month, first off, it changed my life and changed my family's life. But secondly, every month I take my student loan payment date as a gratitude practice to reflect back on. I remember being terrified that this might not work out for me. And I was very insecure about whether or not I should bet on myself, because it seemed like a lot of money and I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. And every month it is a reminder to bet on myself. It is a reminder that it was the right thing and that the work I do changes lives. And so that's my habit. And I wouldn't change any of it, because what you do makes such a difference in the lives of your students and what I believe to be our country. So I thank you so much for that. I feel like you've worked really hard the last 2 years, and you deserve the benefit of the confidence from that. And I just hope that you will give yourselves a chance to soak in how much more capable you are today than you were 3 years ago, because we need that. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but thank you so much for your time today.
I'll just take a couple of questions.
Great.
Yeah. We appreciate you spending some time with us here and those that are online. And a couple of questions that came in. One from Tammy asking, what are the fundamental characteristics present in the highly innovative higher ed institutions? Is there a priority order based on your experience?
Yeah, the most innovative institutions have a comfort with risk. They have a very intentional strategy. When I spent a year shadowing Michael Crow before starting the Alliance, and that was one thing that really struck me. I also noticed when I observe executive cabinets, the most innovative institutions, the lawyer is not the one who speaks last when they are deliberating a decision. Too often I see in executive cabinets, it is the legal counsel who speaks up at the very, like, they go around the table, what do you think we should do? Let's talk about this. The legal counsel always waits to answer at the end. They are the most risk-averse person in the room. They should not be weighing in on decisions. They should be giving you legal parameters, and they should never be the last person. So that's just two things that really strike me. But I would say they do have a strategy for how they incubate new ideas. Like, when I first went to Arizona State, he had this thing called University Innovation, I think it was Innovation Fellows Program. And we borrowed that idea to create our Fellows Program. But think of it this way. He basically had a bunch of early career, just out of grad school students who, whatever random idea Michael Crow came up with, they actually have this little center that their job is to take that idea and play with it and test it and iterate on it and prototype it so that it can be stood up and then go out into the institution. Because you can't always guarantee it's a good idea, but you should have a strategy for how you support new weird ideas. And rarely does a good idea come in a lane. And so when a president has a new idea, they have to ask themselves, is this legal counsel? Is this government relations, communication? My provost is busy. Who can I give this to? Because they don't have time. So a strategy about how you're going to support new ideas. And yeah, those are the things that I think. But if specific interventions around student success, proactive advising, predictive analytics. Actually, I think I have a slide. These are the projects that we have scaled across all of our institutions. I would say the ones that are most indicative when I come to a campus about their innovation readiness and their seriousness of focusing on the student. Predictive analytics, number one. Your data systems don't connect. Our data systems are like in 9 dirty boxes in the basement. And we all think that it's our problem and it's like unique to us. No, all of our institutions, they're all dirty boxes in the basement and they're all trying to transition to like some like Workday or whatever it is. And it's so hard because we seem to think that the intervention is going to be the solution and then we don't staff it. It's like, it's not a jump drive that you bring when you bring in a new idea. So, and this runs into an issue that I know those in the CFO space understand, which is venture capital does not want to pay for a service-based industry. They want to pay for a product. And so what we have in the ed tech space, a bunch of products being sold that don't have project management or onboarding to support them. And then our institutions are really overburdened. So who's going to actually make sure that your thing works? So that is having an intentional strategy about onboarding and project management. But predictive analytics is where I'd start. I'd go on to proactive advising, and I would make sure you have chatbots for wherever you have frontline staff that are getting repetitive questions. It's not chatbots people think are like an admissions thing. No, anywhere, career services, anywhere that there's repetitive questions. It will allow your professionals to actually spend time with students. So that's an answer, I hope.
Oh, that's great. Somebody asked about the process mapping. Is that similar to the old Six Sigma process? I also wanted to just add on to a lot of what you talk about is very introspective and collaborative. Historically, we see a lot of benchmarking in higher ed. Is that part of this, or are you really? I mean, you're dealing with a lot of data, and the predictive analytics is a great place to go. I'm just wondering, the benchmarking, is that kind of old news?
When you say benchmarking, what do you mean? So, like give me an example of the place, because there's a couple. You're bringing up a couple examples, and I want to make sure I answer your question.
It could be size of a department. How many staff do you need for a certain department? Or it could be just how you are performing financially in a certain area. How are you? How much are you spending on instruction versus tuition? Those sorts of things.
So, those things still matter, but they are a part of an answer once you have figured out what the problem is. Too often we start our conversations focusing on the solution or the intervention, or we're going to do X, or we want to be the best, the greatest, we're the Harvard of blah, blah, blah. Okay. So one of the side bullets on the way to that, to make sure that the intervention or strategy you choose is actually, aligns, benchmarking is a part of it. I would say it doesn't go far enough because too often we don't talk to our peers. Especially right now, we become so insular because we don't get to have those water cooler conversations in the hallway at conferences, which turns out that was so valuable because you need to know, like, hey, am I crazy? Or is this the issue? Or is anyone else wrestling with this? And then we understand that we don't have to solve it alone. I think creating spaces for us to identify where we have shared challenges. Benchmarking can be a part of that, where when we build out our plan, we want to make sure that we're in alignment. But I also think too often we treat that as like the map, and it's just a bullet point on the way because there's a lot of context missing. We want to be like that institution. Well, sweetie, fund me like that institution, right? So, that's going to require some hard decisions at the top that they don't want to make. So let's not do that.
You're getting a lot of great praise for the presentation. As I said, loving your presentation, honesty, and excellent ideas for everyone. So that's great. One question that was brought up, I think it was one of your polls, talked about issues with staffing shortages, burnout, and I think you commented a bit on this, but is it staffing shortages or HR resources not matched with skills, or the constant change, or I would say yes, and it can be all of those things. I'm focused on figuring out how we pull together a conversation of national players to work on this. Every single institution is feeling this, and it is, to me, just a waste of time, energy, and money when we work in silos.
So clearly we need to redefine what an academic advisor is. We need to redefine each of these positions, and we have never shown that we can do that. But it's a clear case that other industries have already had to do this, so we should first find out what other industries have gone through this kind of reimagining and redesign of the structure of work and our conception of work. We need to come up with some very clear, boundaries when it comes to virtual versus in person, because there are some institutions who are being really short-sighted, and they are disenfranchising a large population of the workforce who have children, and we don't want to participate in that. We know that there aren't childcare solutions in the midst of COVID, so saying that you have to be in person when what you do physically could actually be done online, we have to actually push ourselves on that. I just think in general, this is a space where it's I would say the number one threat to student success, to progress and innovation. And therefore, I'm pitching funders right now that this is a space for us to have somewhat of X Prize in terms of a process. Every campus should have a clean and easy process by which you examine each role, you figure out how to support it. What does professional development look like? What does a career trajectory look like? Because there are lots of places in our organization, there's no career trajectory. Advisors, that's a talent pool that's phenomenal. We have nothing for them to do after being an advisor. There are places that we just haven't thought this through because we've been playing defense, and it's time for us to do offense.
Thank you so much. I think that's the time.
That's the time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. We are in a break period until 1:30. Thank you very much.